Hi, mystery readers. I'm Alexandra Amor. This is It's a Mystery Podcast, and I'm here today with John Floyd. Hi, John. How are you today?
Hey, Alexandra, I'm fine.
Good, good. Well, let me introduce you to our listeners. John Floyd's work has appeared in more than 250 different publications, including Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, The Strand Magazine, The Saturday Evening Post, and The Best American Mystery Stories. A former Air Force captain and IBM systems engineer, John is also a three-time Derringer Award winner, an Edgar Award finalist, and a three-time Pushcart Prize nominee. His seventh collection of short mystery fiction, The Barrens, is scheduled for release in summer 2018. John's work has been praised by James Patterson, Nevada Barr, Douglas Preston, Jan Burke, Tom Franklin, and many others. That's quite a list, John. I love it. So we're here today specifically to talk about short mystery fiction, and that was how I found you. I'm actually thinking of doing some short mysteries as myself. And so I did a little, as you do, I went to Google and did a little search and found an article that you had written about writing short mystery stories. So why don't you tell us, how did you get started writing short mysteries?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I got started. I grew up on Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Twilight Zone and all those crazy little shows on TV. And I liked that. I don't know. They were all told within like half an hour. They used different stories. There were different stories every week, and like a series. And they had a definite beginning, middle, and end. And they usually had a kind of a surprise ending that I just loved. And so I read a lot of Alfred Hitchcock, Ellery Queen, that kind of thing. And a lot of times that's what came into play. And I just liked that. I liked that format a lot. So I just started dreaming up stories. And I did that for a long time, and finally my wife talked me into trying to submit a few of those, which was really scary to do that.
Yeah.
And then that's how I got going with this.
And so did you write the stories while you were working for IBM? Did you do it on the side, as it were?
I did. I probably did it. I probably did it more than I should have been.
Yeah.
It was on my mind when other things should have been on my mind. But yeah, I did. This was probably. This was like 90, this was the 90s, early 90s, maybe late 80s. And I started writing these stories. And I didn't send them off till, I think, 94. I think early 94, I sent off my first story. And since then, I've been submitting stories pretty regularly. But the whole process of sending an unsolicited manuscript to an editor was just kind of a scary thing. It took a while to get around to doing it. I liked my stories, and I wasn't anxious for someone to tell me they didn't like them.
Yes, yeah, I hear that.
Fear of rejection is a big thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so were they accepted right away, or did it take some time?
I was very, very fortunate. I'm not really sure how this happened, but I picked four stories, no, five stories, and I sent one story to each of five. I sent those five stories to five different editors, and four of those five were accepted and published. And I thought, well, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So I thought this is great. This is easy as rolling off a log. I'll just sell a zillion stories, right? Well, I think about the next 13 or 14 in a row were rejected. So that was good actually, because it taught me that it isn't easy. In order for a story to be accepted by an editor, that a particular editor's got to like your particular story on a particular day. It's kind of a roll of the dice,
Yeah.
But that early success showed me that it could be done. So I think I was awful lucky.
Yes.
I knew at least it could happen. And so I've kept at it. I hope I've gotten a little better at it. My acceptance to rejection ratio is better, but I still get rejected. I think all right. I still get stories rejected, but I think it's at least the odds are a little better now than they used to be.
Yes. And when they get rejected, do you try them with a different editor?
I do.
Oh,
I'll
good.
send us to a different. And I told my students, I've taught writing for a long time, and I've said that what I do is I treat it as a double opportunity when I get a rejection, because I'll send another story to the place that rejected me, and I'll send the story that got rejected someplace else. I honestly do, and I still do that. And there's no rhyme or reason sometimes to this.
Mm-hmm.
The stories that you think will be snapped up, sometimes it's really they're kind of hard to sell. And one that you try to make everyone as perfect as it can be before you send it out. But even so, sometimes when you think, well, this is not maybe as good as some of the others, it gets bought right away. And so there's honestly no rhyme or reason. It's an inexact science.
Yes, yeah. And so I'm just so fascinated by this. And I once heard, I think it was Lawrence Block who writes mystery novels, of course, and he said that writing short mysteries is actually harder than writing full-length ones. So what is it about for you about that form, the real shortness about it that appeals to you?
I don't know. I think one of the things is, we mentioned this, we talked about this earlier, is that you can finish in a matter of certainly a few days, maybe a few weeks, but mostly a few days, and write the end, and then tomorrow write something completely different, and that's just liberating. That's just a great feeling. It's a feeling of completion, I guess. I mean, you finished it and it's done, and you send it off then, and you just don't think about it anymore. You think about another story, and that happens so often that I think that's fun to do it that way. I've tried novels too, and they're fun in a different way. But you live with those characters day in and day out for months and maybe years.
Yeah.
And with this, you can kind of turn them over pretty fast, and I like that. It's just fun to do, and it's the puzzle aspect of it too. Some of these little short mysteries they can almost be puzzles.
Yeah.
And that's fun. I guess there's a manipulation aspect to all this that kind of appeals to me too, but it really is fun. And I've always heard that you not only should you read like a writer, like when you read something, you should think, how is this good? Why am I liking this, or why am I not? But you should write like a reader too, and try to put yourself in the mind of the reader and think, what do I want to reveal and when, and how. Mm-hmm. It goes back to point of view and all those other things, but it's fun to do.
Yes, yeah. And following on from that, so you do have some characters that repeat. So you have the Angela and Chunky series that you've done for Women's World. So tell us a little bit about Angela and Chunky.
Oh, well, I'm not sure why I started doing this, but I'd sold several stories to this magazine called Woman's World. It comes out weekly at Kroger and Target and Walmart, that kind of. And I'd sold them some stories, and so I started. I thought a series might be fun, and I picked a retired bossy school teacher and a guy that she taught in the 5th grade, who's now the sheriff of her little town. And so he kind of helps her solve mysteries, whether she wants him to or not, and corrects his grammar in front of the deputies and all those kinds of things. And so it was an opportunity to be able to put a lot of humor into something, having the interaction between these two, and to be able. The biggest deal was I realized early on that if I could get a series going, especially for a Woman's World story that's very short, it's like 800 words max, 700 words maximum for these little mysteries. If you can have characters that the readers know and that you know pretty well, you know what? You don't have to waste a lot of time with setup and those kinds of things. You can go into the plot quicker.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about you just can't waste words in those little stories. You run out of them that fast. Mm-hmm. It's fun to do the series, and I have like 4 series going now, and that one at Woman's World has lasted a long time. It's been a lot of fun.
And so, tell us a little bit about the other ones that are ongoing.
Oh, I have one with another. She's another retired school teacher, and she has a daughter who's a sheriff, and she trying to get her daughter married all the time, and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of conflict there, fun that can happen there. And her name is Fran Valentine, and her daughter's Lucy Valentine. I call that the Law and Daughter series, and that's appeared in a bunch of different places, and I've still got that ongoing. And then I have a series that just started with Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and they bought the second story in that series, supposed to come out I think next month. And then I sent them the third story in that series, which kind of presents a problem. If they happen not to take the third, where are you going to send it, right?
Yeah.
But that's just something to do. And then another one is a private eye who's back in the Old West, because I'm just crazy about Westerns. I love Westerns. Like Robert Parker's Westerns, the Appalachian. Oh. I just love those things.
Me too.
So I put a private eye back in that time, and a couple of those have been published. And those are a lot of fun to do. So the series are fun. They're limited, but they're fun.
Yes, exactly. And 700 words, I mean, my mind just boggles at how short that is and how much you have to pack into that little space. So do you find that you write it a little longer and then cut it back, or how does that work?
Yeah, all my drafts. These days, my drafts will go about 1,000 words or so, and then I cut them. Then I cut them back because you know that we all write too much. I mean, we all overwrite. You
Yeah.
can go back and take things out. You can even have folks. You can even have folks sit instead of sit down. And stand instead of stand up. I mean, you can take words out all the time. You shrug your shoulders. Well, you can shrug besides your shoulders, right? So just shrug. Don't shrug your shoulders. So there's a bunch of different ways you can go back and weed out words and phrases and ideas and those kinds of things. But no kidding, all my drafts, even for longer stories, and I've sold a bunch of stories that are like 10,000, 15,000 words, those kinds of things. Even so, my drafts always run longer. First drafts always run longer than the second. The second one always longer than the third. I mean, it always does. So I try to shoot for just a little more and then cut it back a little bit. Because if you don't, the thing is, these places. Well, somebody told me once, well, I sent in a story and their guidelines said like 2,000 words, and mine's like 2,500, but that's gonna be okay because it's a great story. Well, the deal is they won't read it if it's more than their guidelines, so they'll never get to discover that it's a great story. So you do have to pay attention to those. And with the Woman's World stories, I just sold them. I can't even believe this myself, but my 95th story for Woman's World was published last week, and that's just it's hard to believe that I've come up with 95 of those of those little stories, and most of them are mysteries. A couple were romances, but 93 of them are mysteries. And I think that just comes easier to me. I think the puzzle part of it comes easier. The structure is kind of fun to me.
Well,
It's really weird, probably. That's really a weird.
well, that actually does bring up another question that I had: is where do you think your ideas come from?
I don't know. I get that question all the time.
Yeah.
At books, that's the one question you get the most. And ideas are everywhere. Ideas are everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I always told my writing students, because some of them really worry about that. Like one lady who had just written a story, and she says, "Boy, that was fun to write, but I don't think I'll ever get another idea." And which I think the thing to do is to say, what if such and such? Come up with any situation with your friends or your family or your whatever, and just come up with a situation that what if such and such happened, and then after that, what if the next thing happened, and pretty soon you've got a story. And I told one lady that the best way, very honestly, the best way to come up with ideas to eat a bowl of chili just before you go to bed at night, and then you wake up at 3 in the morning dreaming in Technicolor and CinemaScope, and which is probably that's probably as good advice as you can give. No way to tell somebody how to get ideas. But if you just are observant, the thing is to be observant, I think, don't you? And then to say,
yeah.
What if such and such happened? And that's the way it works.
Yes. Is that something that you teach your students in your writing classes?
I'm not sure you know what, it's really funny. I don't think you can really teach anybody to write. I'm not sure you can teach. What I do try to do is point out the things that I think can make it easier, that can make it work better. Some of the style things that you just have to know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't care if you pay attention in high school or not. There are things that you would have forgotten, and you just got to know that. Because in the old days, you could send in a story or a novel too to editors or publishers, and they'd say, "Hey, this has got promise, and we'll whip it into shape." These days, they won't. It's got to be as good as it can be, because they know they've got so many submissions coming in, they don't have to worry about it. So I try to teach the kinds of things that maybe I wish I'd known when I started, and show them where the holes are that you might fall into, Yeah.
And one of the things we should mention too is that you collect your short stories and then publish them as books. I'll put links from the show notes to your website with where the books are located. So how many stories would you say you average writing each year?
Well, this past year, I only know this because I looked this morning, but I've sold, so far this year, I've sold 34 stories this year to all kinds of different places. And I have, I think I have 12 stories that have been accepted but not yet published at this moment. And then I've got, believe it, I've got 20-something stories floating around out there right now that I haven't heard anything back from. So I just keep a lot of stories going all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I honestly don't know where they come from, but they just do. I mean, they just, and I'm always thinking about this stuff, which honestly is kind of worrisome, probably. But if I have to drive somewhere tomorrow, I'm going to a book signing 100 miles south of here, and I'll think of a story probably on the way down there or on the way back. I mean, there's no such thing as wasted time when you do this kind of thing, right?
Right.
And it's just the process itself is just a lot of fun. So I write a lot of stories.
And do you have a specific writing practice, or do you just do it when the idea occurs to you?
Pretty much when it occurs to me, because I have so many writer friends who say, well, you got to have a quota. I mean, you've got to set a page count or a word count or something. You got to have a regimen. You need to get up a certain time. You need to write at a certain time. You need to write at a certain place. And I've never done any of that. I mean, see, you don't have to. Okay. Now, hey, I might be better if I did. It might work better if I did, but I don't. I'm just usually thinking about all this stuff, or at least a lot, and I think if it helps you do it, whatever keeps you in the zone, whatever gets you in that comfort place, that you need to be to create this stuff is what you need to do. But I've never had anything like that that'll kick it off from me. I think it'd be great if you did, but one guy told me that he gets a manuscript box. He gets a manuscript box, and it's kind of like a box full of copy paper, a ring with copy, and every day he'll put a page, he'll finish a page, and he'll put it in that box. And he says when the box is full, he says his book is done, which is a lie. But everybody does have little ways of doing this kind of thing. Miss Welty, Eudora Welty, who's from here in Jackson, Mississippi, she had to sit at her desk. This is almost superstitious. She had to sit at her desk in her home, the second floor, looking across the street to the north at the campus of Belhaven College. She had to be doing that in order to finish a story. She might start it in Paris or wherever she is traveling, but she had to finish a story sitting there. It was just the way she had to do it. It's like wearing, certain socks for athletes for a game. Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
The deal is if it works. If you're lucky enough to find out what works, do that.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And
do you have some of those that you have? Do you have?
Yeah, I have sort of a regular practice. So every morning the creativity comes first. That's how I do it. Good. And try to hit a word count every day. You
do try to hit a word count every day. I admire you. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
I probably should do that.
Well, it may not be necessary. Why try to fix what's not broken?
I guess so.
Now, have you ever had... The subject of magazines is interesting to me. And have you noticed, I guess I have a few questions about this, but with, the changes that are going on in the world and the changes to the press and the way that we receive our news and everything, have you noticed that there are fewer magazines around to submit your work to?
There are fewer magazines. There are fewer magazines to submit your work to. Back in, I think, the 40s and 50s, the golden age of short stories, a writer could support himself or herself just on short stories. Lawrence Block could have,
yes.
Louis L'Amour, those folks.
Yeah.
But you can't now. And you have to look for markets, and you have to use the internet, like you were talking about doing. You have to use the internet to find markets to send to. And when you're fortunate enough to get into a market, when one accepts your work, then you try to keep that relationship going. I mean, some of these, and you get to know the editor, and he or she gets to, mostly ladies these days, get to know what you write. That, of course, helps. But there are fewer markets out there. There are. Yeah.
And then the question of ownership comes to me. So you submit the article, let's say Women's World picks it up, pays you for it. Are you still the owner of that piece of intellectual property?
You usually are. The only time you're not is if the contract says they're buying all rights.
Okay.
All rights. And that way you would give up the ownership of that piece, okay? But otherwise, and almost every place these days will acquire first rights, first North American serial rights. And then you retain those rights once the story's published. Or sometimes the contract will say you need to wait 90 days after publication but then you can sell it again. And some of my stories I've sold 8 or 9 times. So you can certainly do that. It's one of the few advantages of short stories over novels is that you can recycle them.
Yes. And I guess that's why you can then collect them into a book and have it published. Yeah.
You can, that's true. And what happened with me is a publisher here in Mississippi happened to see some of my stories. His name is Joe Lee. He works for Dogwood Press. And he'd seen some of my stories in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. And he was thinking about setting up a little publishing company. And so he said, what about if we take some of your stories and we see if it works? So it was a very lucky thing for me to do that. And now we'll have our the seventh book will come out next summer. The last one was last fall, and they are a lot of fun. They're usually previously published stories that, very honestly, I think it's easier to collect stories like that have been previously published, because if you do traditional publishing, even if it's small publishing, you go with a traditional publisher, he or she might want to see maybe a story that's been vetted once before, that at least someone has wanted to publish before, in order to invest in doing that, in the project, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just a couple more questions before we go then. You mentioned that did you say you have tried writing a novel, or you have written novels?
I have. I've written like 3. I have 2 novels out with an agent right now, and he's excited about them, but they haven't sold. And I'm hopeful, of course. I'm hopeful, but that is just a totally different process. Mm-hmm. It really is. For me, ideas for those kinds of things come less often than for the little short story that you can almost see. You can almost see them totally developed in your head before you put them on the page. And I just really kind of like that more than the novel process. I really do. I read novels all the time, but I think the short stories are just fun to create.
And so what was it about the novel ideas that convinced you that they were a novel and not a short story?
They were too long.
Okay. Too big of an idea?
It's too big of an idea.
Yeah.
And in fact, someone told me, I think it was Hemingway who said he never set out to write a novel. He started writing short stories, and sometimes they got too long. It might have been Faulkner. Anyway, I do know Faulkner said once that he tried writing poems, and he couldn't write poems, so he wrote short stories, and then he tried writing short stories, and he couldn't write them, so he wrote novels.
Yeah.
Very honestly, sometimes it's hard to put everything into a little compact package.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun when you do.
Well, I really admire that you do that, especially because I think writing a short story that's not a mystery is one thing. That's one level of difficulty. And when then you add the whole puzzle aspect and get it in there in 800 words, that's just incredible to me.
Well, a lot of short stories not a lot, but some short stories don't actually have to have a plot. I mean, you can have a vignette, a slice of life, character study can qualify as a short story. It's just a series of related events as a story. So you can have short stories, and very good short stories, that don't really have detailed plots. One of Hemingway's was called Big Two-Hearted River, and it was just about a guy who went out in the woods and he caught a fish, and he cooked the fish for his supper, and that was it. I mean, nothing happened, right? But it was a story. But when you do have a plot, that's just what makes it. It's just what makes it interesting. What makes it fun. So I think, and mysteries, you have to have something happening. It doesn't have to be a whodunit. It doesn't be a whodunit. It can be a howdunit or a howcatchem or whatever. But something has to be happening, and something has to get resolved. You need to have a problem and a complication and then a solution.
Yes.
And you just have to do it in not too many words.
Right. That's the tricky part.
Right.
Yes. Well, this has been amazing, John. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been a delight. So as I mentioned in the show notes, I'm going to put links to your website and your books, and so that people know where they can find you. And then people can always pick up A Woman's World or one of the other magazines that are around. So why don't you let everybody know a little bit more about where they can find your books?
Okay. My books are available on Amazon, and they're also available via my publisher's website. It's dogwoodpress.com, one word, dogwoodpress.com, and in bookstores as well. But other places for my stories are Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, I'll have one coming up in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. I've published several in Strand Magazine, Saturday Evening Post. And Woman's World, I've been fortunate. I've had 13 stories there so far this year, so just about one a month.
Yeah.
So you have a one chance in four. So if you go in to pick up a Woman's World, find one of my mysteries in there. But they're a lot of fun too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for being here with me today, John. Take care.
Thank you, Alexandra.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.